I'm Crystal Sexton. I am the head of children's services for the Farmington Community Library at the Farmington Hills location. And I'm very excited to welcome you to our parent workshop. Let me share our screen. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see the slides. And so we are just very grateful to have you here today for our parent workshop, Supporting Your Queer Child. Just a reminder, this is being recorded and it will be posted on the Farmington Community Library's YouTube channel in a couple of days when we get that recording ready. So our kind of agenda for today, we'll go over some housekeeping, just kind of some of the tech stuff, which you may have seen in the slide rotation while we were waiting to get started, and our social contract, how we're going to hold space today. We'll do introductions. Our panelists will share some definitions around this topic, allyship for the community at large, identity development and research, and supporting your child and teen, the main reason we're all here. And then there will be time for Q&A. And you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. You can put any questions you have as they develop. As something's popping up or bubbling up for you, just go ahead and drop it in that Q&A. And I will be monitoring that, and then we'll use those questions for our Q&A at the end. You do not have audio or video capability. If you experience any tech issues, if you're not hearing someone or anything's happening, just drop that in the chat and I will do my best to help you resolve that. And here's how we're going to kind of hold space for this topic and each other today. We're protecting the confidentiality of group members. What's said here stays here. What's learned here leaves here. Be curious, open, and respectful. Assume you can learn from everyone. And then take space and make space. So participate while leaving room for others to contribute, and no pressure to actively participate in the Q&A or chat, but you can simply listen, and that's participating as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Amber Long. I am the mom of a transgender child. She's a 22-year-old adult. I'm also the secretary for the Detroit chapter of PFLAG.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Long. He, him are my pronouns. Again, with Amber, I'm also the parent of a 22-year-old trans daughter, and I am the co-president of PFLAG Detroit.
My name is Nicole Slade. I am a psychologist currently in private practice, but I spent about 8 years as a school psychologist in early ed all the way up to adult ed support. My pronouns are she, her.
All right, let's dive into it. We're going to start off with just simple things like definitions. A lot of times you will see out in the wild the LGBTQ, LGBTQIA, LGBTQA, and these are just a way of taking an umbrella on a certain group. So LGB is lesbian, gay, and bisexual. If you come across something that maybe is a little bit older, something like probably the 90s, early 2000s, it might just say GLB, gay, lesbian, and bisexual. But in the early days of the AIDS crisis, a lot of lesbian nurses were taking care of the mostly men who were dying from AIDS. And so the community decided to honor them and by putting lesbian at the front of the LGBTQIA umbrella. And so, like I said, lesbian, gay, and bisexual are all three sexual orientations. So lesbian is women who are attracted to women. Gay is typically men who are attracted to men, or you could also, a lesbian could also call herself gay as well. Bisexual would be somebody who is attracted to both genders. And then transgender, the T, that's their little flag, the blue, white, and pink flag, and that's transgender. And that's somebody who identifies as a gender that is not what they were assigned at birth.
And then those last three letters kind of go into crossing over multiple different things. So Q could sometimes mean queer or questioning. I could be intersex, and A would be asexual. And then that plus kind of like allows space for us to add more or to include other folks that would be within that queer umbrella. And those are just kind of general definitions that could identify that you have a sexual orientation or that you have a gender identity that kind of fits into the LGBTQIA plus community. It's important to note that sexual orientation is not the same as gender identity. Those are two different concepts that are both covered within the LGBTQIA plus community.
And then continuing on that, as we said in the previous slide, the Q can stand for queer. Sometimes it's questioning, depending on who you ask. I would say use queer with caution. I have not yet come across somebody who doesn't like that word or has a negative connotation to it, but it can be. Back in the day, that was used as a derogatory term to speak down to someone. So now it's mostly reclaimed, and it's like an umbrella term for LGBTQIA, or just to say it in a short way or short fashion, queer. But just know that, like anything else, if you're in a space with someone and they don't like you to use the word queer, then that would just be off limits and, in their space. So it's not usually a bad word, just the context matters. So if it's being used as somebody who is, calling somebody stupid or bad and they're using queer for that, then obviously that's not your word to use. So, yeah.
And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about intersex. This is not as commonly known or referred to. It is included in the LGBTQIA plus community, and this really indicates something that's naturally occurring in humans, and it's something where either their hormones or chromosomes, internal or external genitalia, or any other kind of primary, secondary sex characteristics don't really necessarily align with a male or female uh, binary or assigned sex at birth binary. So a lot of times there's folks that they might have some sort of genetic or chromosomal variance that allows them to develop either neither of the sex organs or both of the sex organs or the genetic markers that would indicate sex organs of one or two or one or the other of their gender. And it's just something that's kind of been included into the group because it is a group that is part of the queer community, and a lot of times they do have a lot of advocacy or needs for advocacy on their behalf.
And I would also like to add that sometimes it can go undetected for sometimes decades and sometimes ever. There is an Instagram or social media influencer who is a big advocate for the LGBTQIA community, and they were assigned female at birth, and for most of their childhood and their teenage years were athletic, and I think it was dance that they participated in, and they had a delayed menstrual cycle whenever they were going through puberty, and the doctors chalked it up to being an athlete, lots of training, being very active. Sometimes that puts off stuff like that, and so that was left and not questioned until quite a bit later, whenever they were in their late 20s, or I'm sorry, late teens or early 20s, and they still hadn't started their menstrual cycle. They went back to the doctor and they started doing some looking into it and some research, and it turns out that they were actually asexual. So a lot of times it's not, yes, thank you. Intersex. And a lot of times it's not really found out unless you purposefully go look for it. A lot of times it's found out if you're doing some sort of fertility training, but it's just something to be aware of, that it's a small part of the population, but they are out there, and a lot of times they don't know it, and sometimes they don't realize it, or it's not found out until they're a little bit later in life.
Continuing on with some definitions, you'll hear a couple of these definitions used when talking about specifically the trans community. That people will say that they're cisgender, which means that your gender identity is consistent with the sex that you were assigned at birth. And you'll find some folks use the transgender uh, uh, descriptor whenever their gender identity differs from the one that was assigned at birth. Within both of these labels, even though we kind of use them broadly, even with cisgender folks, like the gender identity that you might latch onto or that you might present with most often could be a very spectrum. There are some people that will have, they'll present as very masculine in their gender identity. Some folks will present very feminine, even though they might be cisgender. Same way, somebody who is transgender might also have the same sort of thing where they might lean heavily into their trans identity, whether they're trans man or trans woman. And some people might kind of just slightly shade into what that gender expression looks like for a trans person.
Mhm. And just as a note, transgender is an adjective for all of my little nerdy English majors or English lovers. It's an adjective, it's not a noun or a verb. So you would say a transgender person, like a transgender woman or trans woman for short. That's totally okay. Transgenders is not something that's okay. Transgendered is also not something that's okay. You would just refer to them like you would a woman, a trans woman, trans man. And on that note, I don't think we have it on the slide, but transgenderism is not a thing. It's not a word, and it's most of the time used as a dog whistle to speak, down to or in a derogatory way for the trans community. So yeah, just a little note.
And then we want to talk a little bit about intersectionality. And intersectionality plays a big part of how we have to approach conversations about our loved ones and our friends and family within the LGBTQ community. Specifically, when you think about all of the different markers that are labeled here, and this is just a small sampling, there are probably, hundreds more that you could apply here. Things like your race, your gender identity, the language that you speak, the religion that you have or you may have grown up with, your sexuality, your mental health, your age, body size, all of these factors kind of play into the intersection of who you are as a person. So for me as a white cisgender straight person, um, I may have to navigate very few layers in my life within society and culture that would allow me to have certain privileges or certain barriers. I might have to navigate less of those layers to overcome or to have access to spaces within our culture and society, whereas somebody who would be black and transgender, black transgender woman would have to navigate a lot more layers and barriers because of those intersecting identities and intersecting um, facets of their being that would make things a little bit more difficult for them to navigate or could make things more difficult for them to navigate. In the same way that a conversation between me and someone who is a trans black woman might be a little bit more complex and complicated. We might have to kind of really have to listen to each other and lean into a lot of empathy and empathetic understanding to navigate those layers because they're just natural. And these are the things that as our loved ones come out to us, that we kind of have to sometimes set aside or really dive into those intersectional identities. And this is a really important thing. Like you kind of think about over the last 5 years. In 2020, we had this really big move for the civil rights movement. And as a lot of people were learning about anti-racism and how to be anti-racist, they were being exposed to this these conversations about intersectionality and how to navigate the world in an intersectional way as we were learning about how to be anti-racist.
Mhm. Also, when I first started learning about this too, I pictured intersectionality as two things, just an intersection, this one and this one. But everybody is going to have more than just two. I have a background, a religious background that I don't claim anymore. I am a transplant from Florida. I am a woman. I am also short. So petite clothes don't fit me. So everybody is going to have multiple spectrum on this intersectionality. It's going to look more like this flower looking Venn diagram than just two things. Most people are going to have several things that they claim as their identity. So I love this graphic here.
And a great quote about intersectionality, I'm going to read this because I don't have it memorized, is by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it says, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it locks and intersects. It is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experience of discrimination and privilege.
And then the gender unicorn, which I just think is adorable. I think this is also a great graphic it breaks things down to be really easy, really simple. And it's also something that is good for somebody who is maybe not an adult and they're a little bit younger and trying to find words to express how they feel. And this is a great way to bring that into like everyday conversation. And you can see, we'll just go from the top down. The gender identity and the little thought bubble is just how you identify a female, male, or other like non-binary, something like that. That is just how you identify in your brain. Your gender expression is just that. So I am a woman. I do not typically, you will not find me in a pink, frilly, ruffly dress, probably ever. I tend to like pants a little bit more, maybe a little bit more masculine type clothes. I typically do like a plain shirt, maybe stripes. It's just how I express my femaleness to the world. I'll put some jewelry on and I have, hair that I like to play with and curl, but that's how I express my gender as a woman. You may see somebody who expresses their gender as they always have a tulle skirt on that's bright colored. That's just how she or he decides to express their gender. And then the sex assigned at birth is pretty much, laid out and obvious. It's just the sex that you have on your birth certificate. The doctor looks at you, looks at your outer genitalia and said you're male, female, or other. Sometimes they do catch the intersex at birth, and a lot of times there are decisions that are made at birth for the newly born child that where the parents or the doctors think that this would be how the child is going to end up expressing their gender or their sex. So that's probably a whole other conversation that is above my pay grade. But that is something that does happen. And then the physically and emotionally attracted to. So I am a woman and I've already, I described how I express my gender. I was assigned female at birth and I am physically and emotionally attracted to men, but that's not always going to be the case. So it's just, it's adorable little graphic. And somebody told me out there that there's a flying gender unicorn, and I would like to look into that because that sounds even more adorable.
And also wanted to take a moment to talk about like you'll hear a lot of people talk about and especially with a lot of the pressures that we're under in culture and politics today that people talk about this being a new or a fad or a trend or it's something that's just happening. The reality is that throughout recorded history and since time immemorial, thriving cultures have recognized, revered, and integrated more than two genders. And we have a few examples here. The Hijra from South Asia, Two-Spirit, which is predominant in the Americas, and the Fa'afine in Samoa. These are just three examples of gender diversity that has persisted for a very long time in different cultures around the world. It's not uh, a new or a newfangled or a fashionable thing. This is something that has always existed. In the same way that in the same way that colonialism and white supremacy has also existed that sought to erase those identities in different areas across the globe, especially with the expanse of European influence across imperial or empires and across colonized areas. So just something to be mindful of and to consider. There's a lot of great resources, a lot of great books out there that talk about trans history. And there's a map here. There's a linkable map, a clickable map here that will show you and give you a little bit more information about that those gender identities and gender expansive expressions that have existed for a long time in these different world areas.
So now we're going to talk about some gender affirming practices. So that is just like this says, the process of bringing yourself into alignment with your gender identity, or sometimes known as transitioning. So, this can be dependent on age. It can be dependent on the person's wishes. And it can go from social all the way to medical. So we have a friend who has a transgender daughter, I believe it is, and she is in third grade. So there is, despite some people's cry, there's no one doing any kind of gender affirming care surgeries on a third grader. So gender affirming care for third graders looks more like calling them by a chosen name, changing the pronouns that they were assigned at birth, and letting them express their gender in one way or another. So I use that example as a kid, but that could also be a full-grown adult. They might only want to change their name and their pronouns, and that's all they want to do. You could also have someone who wants to legally change their name. My brother and sister-in-law, they have a trans son, and they live in a state where it was quite easy to change their name. So when their son came out, they changed it and legally, and so his legal name has now changed. That also can be like a gender marker. If we're talking about passports, driver's license, any kind of ID, you can change your gender marker depending on the state that you live in. You will be able to change that on paperwork. And then we'll also talk about the medical gender affirming practices. That could be anything. That could be hormones, that could be top surgery, like removing breast or getting a breast implants. It could be a hormone therapy, gender blockers, or puberty blockers, or puberty pausers, I think is what we're calling them now. So it can range from anything. It can range from all of these, one of these, some of them, none of them. I know a trans woman who has done everything. She's done vocal training. She's had surgery on her vocal cords. She's had top surgery, also bottom surgery. And then I know a trans woman who changed, she's just called by a new name and she's taking hormones, but both of them are fully trans women. I want to make sure that we're not gatekeeping the trans identity, like you are not trans until you do this, that, or the other. So if the person tells you that they're trans, and then you just follow their lead. And then having a fluid gender identity doesn't assume that one is transgender. That is something, sometimes there will be people who feel like one gender or another based on the day. There are some tricks that you can use if this is your child. I've heard the trick of using like a little wristband, so you don't have to ask the child every day, or maybe not child, but an adult or a partner or a friend, what pronoun should I call you today? If they're wearing a blue wristband, then the pronouns would be he, him, and then the chosen name that they have decided on. And then, like I said, transgender is not dependent on a medical procedure, treatment, or therapy.
So why we're here today is you guys are all here and showing up because you're interested in how to support the youth in your life who maybe have come out to you. These language is targeted as if you're the individual's parent, but you can also use a lot of this language and a lot of what we're going to talk today. If you're not in a parenting role, if you have nieces, nephews, close friends, so don't feel limited by if we're using language as parent or guardian in this sense. But as we all know, those of us who are parents, that we tend to be our kids' rock, right? We become our kids' first sense of who they are and their sense of safety. So it would then make sense that parental support is one of the most significant protective factors for our LGBTQ IA plus youth. So when parents are interested, understanding, want to learn more, and are connected and are interested in all aspects of their child's life, and that includes their gender identity and expression, you will find that it also supports their mental health. It reduces the risk of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. And support is a very vague term. So what does that look in real life? How do we support our children, right? So support comes by using their correct names, their correct pronouns, listening without judgment, and then being your child's advocate in any way that might look in your life, right? So this becomes a challenge when sometimes we are advocating for our child in social situations, right? So we might face social stigma, family resistance, even some of our own personal discomfort, misunderstandings, the stereotypes that maybe we didn't know we held until someone in our life came out to us. So that process of checking in with yourself, if I find myself being reactive or having a strong emotion to something, being able to be kind to yourself and take the time to reflect on maybe why you might be feeling these feelings. So this support as a parent, as you know, in all aspects of our kids' lives is always changing. So our kids are always growing and we're always learning, right? One phrase I use with my 9-year-old son, he's probably sick of me saying it, is like, this is my first time raising a 9-year-old. And when he's 10, I'm going to say the same thing. This is my first time raising a 10-year-old. And I even use that with my younger son. This is my first time raising a 7-year-old Ian. I've never done that before. And so it's okay that our kids are going to change and they're going to have different needs. And it's okay that we're not always going to feel like we have the right answer. Our kids don't need us to be perfect parents, right? They need us to be present parents. So as long as we keep learning with them, we have empathy for them, and we're creating a safe home environment where a child feels like they can come to you when they're ready without pressure, that is going to be the foundation in which all of our parenting is rooted in, right? Sorry, I'm going to keep on with my notes here. So as a psychologist, I'm really interested in many things, but one of those things is identity development, right? And there's lots of different theories about how one develops a sense of self, and then again is then modified, right? When we add different identifiers to ourselves. So the trajectory might feel very similar in ways that you might have experienced your sense of self growing up if you don't identify as part of the LGBTQA+ community. We're going to keep that framework in mind and add to that are individuals who are identifying in this way. They have added stressors that you might not have experienced as a cis person. So children notice very early on, this could be in kindergarten, it could be in 1st or 2nd grade, it could be earlier, that they just sense that something is different, right? As a society, we have implicit and explicit messages that we're sending to children all the time about who they are and who they should be, how boys look, how girls look, right? This could be in media, things that we're consuming, or just the way that we talk as a society, right? So they may start to notice feelings or preferences that don't align with either societal expectations or standards that they're seeing. So that might be stage 1. And then your child starts to explore that identity, right? They might be gravitating towards media that represents them or have private reflection. You might see this expressed through play in our younger children. You might see that expressed through researching or what they're identifying with online if you have an older child who has social media or things like that. And they might then come to you, hopefully asking questions about what these terms mean. But that's those 2 stages, 1 and 2, it would be normal then and expected that a child might have some confusion or anxiety, that they might be feeling different from the quote unquote norm. And what does that mean? And that's might be scary, it might not. A child then might begin to identify with specific labels, right? Many of the labels that were already defined earlier in this presentation. And then they may choose to come out to trusted adults in their life. Hopefully that's their parent. It may not be, and that's okay too. And then hopefully, as we're growing and we're maturing and we're experiencing interaction with our family members and our society, that we embrace our identity and it becomes integrated in their whole self. So if we reflect back on some of the previous slides and that beautiful flowery Venn diagram, it's a facet of who they are. And it doesn't always want to be the thing that we maybe want to hang our hat on, and maybe the thing that is most salient for them in the moment, but it is one piece of your whole child, right? And as they embrace that identity and integrate it into their sense of self, they might be seeking a community. They might want to take advocacy or leadership roles, or they may not. So again, this is very fluid. And hopefully we're seeing as a child is progressing through these things and all of their, as you would expect, stages of development, they're integrating and weaving this throughout. We're going to see an increase in their confidence and emotional resilience, right? And then it sometimes will just become unspoken. We don't always, might not be the first thing that we talk about, right? Because again, it's one facet of who we are. So this is not a linear process, even though it's outlined for us very beautifully in these very clear stages. These stages are not encapsulated. They are constantly in motion with each other and fluid. And you may find that your child, as they're exploring, they go back to the awareness stage. Like, I didn't know that this term existed, and that term actually fits my sense of self better now that I'm learning more about this community I just didn't know existed. So you may find that this cycle is repeating itself, but also this cycle continues well throughout childhood and into adulthood. The myth that our brains stop growing when we're 25, that's not true. And I hope people don't identify with that anymore. We're constantly learning from our experiences. We're constantly learning more about ourselves, and we are constantly growing and changing. So that is also a typical part of the process as well in stages of identity development.
Sorry about that. So if your child comes out to you, this is what I wish we would have had whenever our daughter came out to us. First of all, realize that they trusted you enough to tell this part about them to you. So that's a big step. Kids typically aren't going to go around telling you as their parent something that they don't think you're going to like about them. I never fessed up to, coming home late for a curfew because I knew my parents weren't going to like it. So if your child comes out to you, know that they see you as a trusted adult. So listen to what they say and thank them. Offer them support depending on the stages of development. If you have a 40-year-old child, they may not need you to support them and guide them to, finding a doctor or advocating for them at a school event or something like that. So that's just basically see what they need. If you just offer it, they may need it, they might not, but the fact that they know that you are there with them is huge.
I would say, no, I was gonna pick next.
Oh yeah.
I would say, obviously, you want to respect their confidentiality, respect them as an autonomous person. So, let them know that you're not going to break their confidence. Like, this is something that they came to you. It's a very personal thing to them, and you should treat it as such. And obviously never out them to anybody, especially someone who has not been trusted by them to already out themselves to. And remember that your child hasn't changed. They are the same little brat that they've always been,
The best
in
way.
the best way
Yes.
possible.
Yes.
They're the same bundle of joy. They're the same bundle of nerves and fear that they might have always been.
Yes.
And they're just letting you in on one more secret or one aspect of who they are.
And we say the same thing. Like, our daughter has a dry sense of humor and is very sarcastic, and she is still the same sarcastic, dry humored person. She's just a girl now. So yeah, they haven't changed in the most basic way. They're still your child. You just know a little bit more about them now. And then let your child take the lead. This is something that I also had to learn. So when I found out that our daughter was trans, I was like, cool, let's go shopping. We can get you some new clothes. Let's go get some skirts. If you want to do makeup tips, I'll figure out how to do, teach makeup. And she didn't want to do any of that. She typically wears almost the same thing as she wore before she transitioned. Every once in a while, she'll wear a skirt or a dress or something like that. She typically maybe lipstick, but that's not always the case. So let your child take the lead. Same thing with you don't need to go tell everyone that you meet, all family members, all friends, all teachers, that your child is trans, unless that's something that you want them to do, or they want you to do, sorry. So yeah, take your child's lead. So if you have a question like, what do I do here? The answer should be, what does my child want me to do? Again, stages of development that might be a little bit different. A 15-year-old is going to be able to express that and navigate that and communicate that better than a 5-year-old. But typically typically know what your child needs and wants, and then you take the lead from your child. It's going from, I don't know if you were going to say this later, but it's going from like a writer of a story. So you're not your child's writer of their story. You're just the producer who pays for things to happen.
And yeah, they're writing their own story.
They're writing their own story. Yeah.
Parents, obviously, I think Nicole's already alluded to this as well, but we're the foundation of their physical and emotional safety for all of our children, regardless of how young they are, regardless of how old they are. So be really mindful and avoid language like, "Oh, I already knew," or challenging them with statements like, "Are you sure? How do you know you're sure? Is this a phase? My God, do not say that under any circumstance." Your child will let you know if it's a phase or not. They will lead the way. One quote that has come in very handy for me over the years, and it has really resonated with me recently, is curiosity leads us to critical thinking, and critical thinking leads us to transformation. And I'd probably add at the beginning of that a little bit of humility as well. So understanding that we don't know everything, that we can't be certain of everything. And then that will make us a little bit curious about the world around us, which will help us think critically about the world. And then also, hopefully, transform the way that we approach the world, and especially how we approach our relationships with our loved ones.
Mhm. And then know that you can keep them safe. So you're not going to be your child's first bully in anything. We're not going to bully our child about their weight, about their grades, about their behavior. And we're not going to bully them about this either, that you are going to be that safe space for them, no matter what they need. Like our daughter doesn't need us to do everything for her now. She actually moved out. She loves to remind us of that. We miss her. She lives 8 minutes away. That's fine. But she knows that if anything happens and she is feeling vulnerable emotionally or any other way, that this is a safe place for her to come home to. Like she can come and vent to us, she can cry to us, she can ask us for advice and
Eat our food.
eat our food. Yes, when your kids move out, they will still come home to eat your food.
And one thing I always tell parents whenever they come out, or when they come to PFLAG and they're really, concerned or worried, I always tell them, congratulations. You have now been promoted from just a parent. Now you are a parent who is also an advocate, an ally, and an activist.
I will also say that when your child comes out to you, your job is to do all of this learning on your own. Don't make your child your own personal encyclopedia and Wikipedia page. The fact that parents or friends or allies are here listening to this or watching this later is amazing. This is huge. Google comes in handy. So if you're not sure what the letters in the LGBTQIA an acronym mean, go to Google, go to PFLAG, go to a trusted resource. Your child, don't put the burden of learning on your child. This is a journey that you take together, but a lot of the learning should be done on your own.
And a lot of this is rooted in parent anxiety, right? We worry all the time about our children, and I experienced this when my kids were in preschool as well. Like they like to paint my nails, right? And so then they're like, "Well, I want to paint my nails, and I want to paint my nails like a Pokemon, right?" And my initial thought was like, "Oh no, the kids at school, they're gonna be this way, right? I've already put my prejudgment, right?" And I had to really check myself, and that I wasn't putting something on them to be prepared, to be anxious, to be worried about how other people were going to react. And so, like, what does that look like in real life, right? So we've talked about like, oh, phrases to avoid. Well, then what do we say, right? Do we say nothing? Or so I have some sentence starters here, things that you could use, and how I navigated that in that very small way. And my small children was like, oh, I wonder, what do you think people might, think of your nail polish at school? What are things that you think they might say or questions they might have? And my big thing too is telling everybody that I already made sure that it was kid safe nail polish, that I wasn't the mom who was putting regular nail polish on kids, right? And then, surprise, surprise, at the end of the day, when I asked about it, they said, oh, they said they liked the color. Right. So I think sometimes we carry our own anxiety that the world, it can be a really unkind place. And I don't want to minimize that. But there's also a lot of joy in it too. And there's going to be lots of times where your community surprises you in the best way in supporting your kid. And some of it is us keeping our parental anxiety in check, that we want to wrap our kids in bubble wrap and we want to take away all of the things that might happen to them. And then we sometimes rob them of the beauty of their community, seeing them and loving them of how they are, right? So preparing them for the positives as well, as what we might perceive as the challenges. So just sort of dovetailing onto some of the language we already talked about, right? Last week you said that you were bi and now you're saying you're gay. So which is it, right? Like we're gonna avoid stuff like that. But again, it goes back to what I was saying about like if you find yourself having a immediate tensed response or confused response, that's not the time to say anything, right? That's the time to listen and just ask questions, right? Lead with curiosity. I don't know much of the difference about this and this. Do you want to talk about it? Maybe you don't. Are you available to talk about it later after I do some research on it? Because I don't know that term, right? So going on to what Amber was saying about not putting the burden of education on your kid, but also just feeling like you can have a conversation with them. Hopefully, again, we've built that foundation so our kids are not going to be offended when we ask them questions or we want to know more. Hopefully, they'll feel encouraged by that. We're not going to say it's just a phase. As an early 2000s girly, I can tell you I'm still emo to my core. It was never a phase. You won't grow out of it when you meet the right man or woman. I'm also just careful in the language I use around my kids, right? I'm the mom of two boys, and so I don't say, oh, when your wife does this, I say, when your partner, right? I don't assume that my kids are going to get married. I don't assume my kids are going to maybe start a family if that's not what they want. So even just finding ways to not gender your language when you're talking about your children may also just be sending that implicit message to your kids that you're leaving that open for them and we're not making assumptions about them. So try not to use those phrases if you can. Again, we're not expecting perfection. You can catch yourself in those ways and you can correct and we can be nimble in that way. So instead of it's just a phase, you'll grow out of it, it's a push away effect. How did you learn about that? Like, tell me more. What drew you to that when you learned about it? I want to know more. Like, what did you connect with so that you're understanding your child instead of trying to understand what the label is? Because that's important. But the most important thing is you're understanding why it is that your child is identifying with that particular label. I see this a lot in my practice of just evaluating children and adults for neurodifferences like ADHD, autism, all those things. Oh, you're TikTok diagnosed, right? You think you're autistic because you saw that on TikTok and because you hold your hands a certain way, right? And it's very dismissive language. And I actually get really excited as a clinician if I meet a client and they're like, well, I feel, I saw this on TikTok and I know I'm not supposed to. And I go, no, tell me more about why that particular TikTok connected with you. Like, I want to hear what that person said and why you felt seen for the first time and that you didn't know that wasn't maybe something everybody did. It's not always what we thought it was, right? Maybe you thought you were exhibiting behaviors that we define as being on the autism spectrum, but it actually turned out it was OCD, right? Like that's what we're here to figure out together. So I take that lens and I apply it to this, right? So what did you see on TikTok that felt right for you, or that video, or can I see that video? I'd love to see what it is about that experience that person had that you connected with. And again, it goes away from this push away effect to this pull in effect. You're pulling your kid in, you're telling them, thank you for telling me, like I want to learn more. And it helps contextualize their experience. Don't say you'll change your mind when you get older, and maybe they will, right? But that's not the time nor the place to say it. So again, this language can be dismissive and it causes more distance rather than being closer. So take time to reflect. Feel like I'm going back to that. Just be reflective as you can as you're moving through this process to help support our kids. So how do we build that foundation to be inclusive, right? It's an affirming home that is essential for our LGBTQ plus youth to thrive. So I already talked about using inclusive language, displaying supportive symbols, or just having a mixture of literature. As far as I know, as my young children are now, they don't identify as anything other than cis, but I have a pride flag flying outside of my house, 365, never goes down. I have a mixture of books in my house with different main characters that are non-binary, who are trans. It's just part of our home library. It's part of the language that we use. So that's already sort of embedded in our home, partly because I don't know, right, what my children will identify with in the future, but also that I want every kid walking by my house, or every adult walking by my house, or every friend they bring home to my house to automatically know that this is a place where we are accepting of that. So celebrating identity milestones, even if you're using and displaying and are supportive of this community already in your home, that you're celebrating these milestones and participating in pride events if that's something that your family feels comfortable with. We're a family of introverts, so we're not always participating outwardly. We're participating more in our small circles or with our families, having these open discussions. So having that open dialogue, checking in with your kid, being proactive. Your kids are hearing and seeing things all the time. We don't particularly have the news on in the house, but my kids go to school and it's a topic of conversation. And so your kids may be coming home, I'm focusing a little bit on elementary age kids, but also our middle school and high school age kids, they're being inundated with lots of media and so just checking in with them if they've heard things in the news or there's events that might be distressing to them that you want to address that. It can again be our natural response to be like, oh, that's not going to happen here, or this isn't a big deal, right? We want to take that anxiety from our kids and hold it instead of again exploring and just letting it be. Just sit with the fact that maybe they've read or heard or experienced something that was distressing to them, to try to pause the I'm going to go email, I'm going to call. Let's sit and be and process if there are any signs of distress or there's anything that you guys need to process together as a family unit. So small gestures matter, right? Correcting others who might misgender your child, or being that child advocate, the advocate for your child at school is what I meant to say, and ways that you've already done. If you have a school-age child, you've already had to send teacher emails, I'm sure, whether that's about allergies or learning differences or changes in home structures, right? You've already been your child's advocate. And so learning how to do that now that we might know a different facet about our child. And again, empowering our students as they get older, our children as they get older, on how to advocate for themselves when appropriate. There's always going to be a power differential in schools, so we want to be mindful of that. But you're sending a message and connecting with like, we are in this together and I will take your lead in whatever that looks like. So you're creating a space where your child can feel seen, respected, and that it contributes significantly to their well-being throughout their life. So part of that support is that we do have the research that supports that LGBTQ plus youth do face higher rates of mental health challenges. And there is, unfortunately, in some media that there is this connection between, it's represented as if we know that being LGBTQ plus is bad because we can see higher rates of depression or anxiety or self-harm in these children or these adults. And that is a false connection and a connection meant to scare adults or push a particular point of view. When what's really happening there, and if you're a person who's ever been part of a marginalized group, you'd identify with this, and that LGBTQ plus youth have higher rates of anxiety or depression because they're experiencing more discrimination, rejection, and isolation than their peers who are not. So that would be a typical response to adversity, is to experience anxiety and depression. It doesn't mean that we don't address it. It doesn't mean that we say, well, everybody, it's a hard life if you identify this way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we don't want to pathologize a child's experience because what they're experiencing is a real traumatic or discriminatory event that is prolonged. So we want to support them, and that support could look like getting therapeutic interventions, right? Connecting to different groups that they can find their community, because they may not find their community in school because there's a smaller population, right? And in that school unit, right? If you're in a school of 400 kids, the likelihood that you might also have another trans student at school might be really low, versus if you're going to a school with 1,300 kids, right? So your population and your exposure and your group changes. So be vigilant for those signs of distress, right? If you see your child withdrawing, they don't want to talk, we're wearing long sleeves, we're being secretive in any way, those are times where we want to, again, try to connect and not ignore those signs. With the overlay of being a middle schooler, a teenager is a tumultuous time in any identity development. And we do see increased depression and anxiety in all teens, because they are trying to figure out who they are. So we're also not going to assign all behaviors that we see in our middle school and high school kids as just moodiness, right? Or they're just this way, or they're depressed because they're gay, right? Those are not the connections that we want to make, but we also don't want to ignore signs either. So it's a delicate dance to walk. But what I say to those of you here, either live or watching this, is that I trust that you know your child, right? You don't need me to tell you what is going to be the right step to take, because you are the expert in your child, right? I hope. And so you're going to navigate and thread that needle with them. So these conversations with them builds resilience, and it fosters self-esteem, right? So encouraging positive relationships, ensuring that your child feels safe and supported in your family unit, they're going to be able to carry that with them even through adversity, even when they experience discrimination in these challenges. Again, they know that you're a unit that can persevere and move through these challenges together. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart as someone who spent many, many years being an advocate for children in schools. The thing that drew me to school psychology is I felt much of my career that I was this bridge between home and school, that I sat right in the center, oftentimes in meetings trying to bring these sometimes opposing ideas or needs together, because at the end of the day, everyone sitting at this table is here because they love kids, right? And we want to help kids, and we want what's best for them. And so schools, by definition, their kids are spending the majority of their day there, right? So they play a critical role in shaping a child's sense of self and safety and belonging, right? And again, if we go back to those implicit and explicit messages that are being sent, they're being sent these messages for 7.5 hours a day while they're in school as well, right? So they face unique challenges. This could include bullying, it can be exclusion, and it also can be lack of affirming policies or lack of policies at all to address a student's needs. So when I was working in a high school here in Michigan, one of the challenges that we had was we did have gender neutral bathrooms that were single stall bathrooms. And then we had traditional makeup of bathrooms. And because vaping is pervasive in our high schools, what was happening is that students were using these single stall gender neutral bathrooms for vaping. The administration's solution to that was to lock all of the gender neutral bathrooms, which left all of our LGBTQA plus students without a safe space to use the bathroom. And it caused a lot of friction, not only between the students and the staff, but the parents and the staff. And then there was a how do we address both of those needs at once? What need trumps the other need, right? And the truth was is that they didn't have a policy to address it. And in the meantime, in working all of that out, many of our students were left without a safe place to use the bathroom. So that I always want to come with a sense of I am a strong believer that people in schools are trying to do the best that they can, meaning administrators in schools. Oftentimes, they don't have a guidebook, or they're stuck between not knowing, not being educated, or not having the most up-to-date research or legal findings, and then the real limitations of the space, right? What do we do when our buildings were not built to be inclusive, right? So those are all things that your child may or may not experience while they're going to school. And so as an educational advocate, you want to ensure that schools are being inclusive and compliant with legal protections. And this includes if your child may also have an IEP or a 504, you can also, if the child wants, to have that included in that language as well. To make sure that we're having gender affirming accommodations. This could look like accommodations for using the changing rooms in the gym. If there is, they have a class where they have to change for gym, making sure that they're protected. And you can reference Title IX, and I'll be covering that in a little bit. Michigan has made some more precise language to Title IX when communicating with your school. So advocacy is about creating safe environments where every child can learn and grow. And it doesn't always have to be adversarial. I say assume good intent. Assume that your school maybe has never had to address this before, or that particular person you're interacting with the school is coming from a place of unknowing, not from malice. I apologize. You may hear my dog begging to get into my office here. So the legal landscape here in Michigan and all across the US, unfortunately, is a bit of a shifting stance, constantly changing. And even in the last 5 years, we've seen media portrayal of legal protections for LGBTQA plus individuals, children through adults, at times being called into question. So here we have the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act protections here in Michigan. So in 2023, Michigan expanded by adding something called Act 6 to this particular Civil Rights Act that extended protections to specify that it does include members of the LGBTQA community. So you'll find often in legal frameworks that either the language is very precise and we're following the exact letter of the law. And so since the exact letter of the law did not include LGBTQA plus individuals, they're not included, right? And you'll also find that sometimes legal experts use the fact that they're not there or a vague term to be inclusive. And it really just depends on who's interpreting that law. So Michigan took steps to clarify vague language and make sure that we are being inclusive. So that took effect in 2024, even though it was signed in, that it was put into place in 2023. Don't be surprised if your child's school or staff may not be aware of this change. So when I was working in schools, for example, 504 law changed in 2016, the same year my son was born. And I often found that academic counselors were still referencing 2016 law and saying, for example, that a student wasn't eligible for 504 accommodations referencing old and outdated law in 2022, right? And that is because they may not have had district specific trainings on this. And that's not because they don't care, it's because they're doing a million other things that also include, they want to advocate for your children, they just might not know. So they might not have had district sponsored trainings or experiencing navigating your child's specific need in this way. It does not excuse discrimination. It does not excuse not providing what your child needs. But if you find that a representative from your child's school administrator or a teacher says something that violates what you thought you knew or what you had read, my default answer is always, can you show me in the district policy where it says that my child can't have that or that's not allowed? Can you show me in the, it's called MARS, the Michigan Administrative Rules, where it's where that regulation is? I just want to research it more. Often you'll find that question alone triggers them to do more research because they can't find a district policy that says that your child can't use this bathroom or can't use this changing room, right? Because it likely doesn't exist. Have just never experienced it before or have been told by somebody else incorrect information. So again, I do my best, to extend grace to our school staff that it may come from a place of not knowing rather than not wanting to provide or support your child.
All right. Thank you for all of that amazing content. And I see that we have some great questions popping up in the Q&A. So I'm just gonna read those and
Yeah.
make sure that I have them. Okay, so one of our teen librarians is actually on the webinar and asked, what are some best practices on how to help kids and teens come out to the older generations, like their grandparents? And as a follow-up to that, how to help them with that if it doesn't go well?
I think we could probably answer that. Like Amber and I, we have direct experience with this because two examples. Her brother, his kids, one of them came out as trans several years ago when they were just 9 years old, I believe.
Yeah.
When he was 9 years old, and the we've alluded to our religious background, and our parents, her parents, are still very much embedded in a very conservative religious background
Mhm.
in Florida. So when our brother-in-law's son came out, he wanted to let the family know like what the expectation was around
Mhm.
gendering the kid correctly and using the correct name and pronouns. Was very direct with his communication and gave very specific instruction on what support and acceptance would look like and embrace would look like. And it did not go well. And the result was that they had to make very hard decisions about the presence of those older parents and those older folks in the life of their kid and in the life of their family. Um, so there was already, like the groundwork was kind of laid. So when our daughter came out, we kind of already knew how things were going to go, and you could talk a little bit about that.
It went pretty much the same. It didn't go well. My parents were very much, we love the child, but they will always be, a son or a grandson or a granddaughter, whichever one you're talking about. And that's really hard to argue with. They feel love, but the child doesn't. They don't feel the love from the grandparents. So that's really hard. Some of the best practices would be, like we were saying earlier, follow the lead of the child. My brother had a little bit of a different situation because the child was younger, and my brother was more of a protector and making sure the child was safe. And somebody who is not going to accept you, not going to use your name and pronouns, is not a safe person. So my brother was kind of the gatekeeper for that younger child. When our daughter came out, she was older, she could make her own decisions, and she asked us to tell my parents. She had a feeling that it wasn't going to go well, and she said, "Can you please just tell them?" And we did. We followed her lead, we told them, and it didn't go well. Looking back, I don't really think that we would have done anything different, but I would say tailor the situation to the parents or to the grandparents or the older generation. If it's something where they are big readers, maybe you could give them a book or an article to read. If they're big readers, but they like stories more, there's a book out there called Transitions of the Heart, and it's multiple stories. It's a collection of essays and stories about people who had somebody come out in their life and how they changed their mind or accepted them. If it's somebody who doesn't read and they would prefer to watch something, give them a YouTube video, maybe not something that's heavy on philosophy or history or whatever. Just tailor it to the recipient and follow the child's lead. And if it doesn't go well, you're just there. Like you're just there for them. And a lot of times, I ask friends, what do you need? Do you need to just vent? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to talk about anything other than that? Do you want to go have coffee? Do you just want to sit here and do some parallel play? We can both scroll on our phones while you're in the room with a safe person. So it's just kind of depends on, if it doesn't go well, what does that child or that friend or acquaintance, what do they need? And that's, that shows them that you care, you're interested in their well-being, their mental well-being, their emotional well-being. Yeah, just see what they need. And also, I will say PFLAG also has some literature about faith in families. A lot of times, the pushback from older people is that of, God made you and you're perfect and you're going to always be a boy or a girl. But there's some really good resources out there regarding faith and accepting of the overall queer community. And I can get some resources if you'd like later.
I would like to add one more thing on that. We've alluded to using Google as a resource, and I want to be very careful and mindful that not everybody's Google is created equally.
Mhm.
So if you direct someone to use Google, their algorithm might be broken. So a lot of times people say, "Oh, Google is free." Well, no, Google is broken.
Mhm.
So I say if you can find trusted resources, if you know of trusted resources, I think PFLAG is a great resource. Your library, your local library is a great resource. Um,
Mhm.
Lean into those resources and push people towards those resources rather than saying, you know what, just look it up. Just Google it
Mhm.
because YouTube and Google and TikTok and Facebook and everything else in the world is broken right now. That if it's got an algorithm, it's broken.
Mhm.
So just be really mindful about the fact that not everybody's Google is going to give them the right search results.
And we also told my parents how we had seen a positive change in our daughter. She's not one that struggled with mental health, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, but we noticed a change in her. She was just quicker to laugh and to giggle. And we included those positive changes that we saw in her to the grandparents to let them know, like, this isn't a horrible thing. She's finding joy in being trans, and, we want you to come and celebrate that with us.
So I just want to tack on and add to that is when I was talking about power dynamics and the relationship between a student and a teacher, or a child and a parent, right? There's a hierarchy built in there, and that hierarchy can be amplified, right? When it's even the generation one above, right? That we want to be in maybe some cultures or some family units that we are deferential. And so that can be a hard conversation to navigate. And the example that you gave of, your brother really setting that standard about what they were going to allow or not allow, and having that conversation with their child about what that would look like for that person, right? Are they ready to disclose to that person or not? Are they ready to be vulnerable to that person or not? And taking your child lead on that. One thing that I'll also say is really shifting language from a rule to a boundary. And so what I mean by that is that a rule guides someone else's behavior. You can't call me that. One I use in my house frequently, right, is if I say you can't yell at me, I can actually physically stop someone from yelling at me, right? If I put my hand over my kid's mouth, they lick me or bite me, so that's not going to work out. So how do I change a rule into a boundary? I don't stay in rooms where I get yelled at, right? I can control that. Whether it's you're my kid, you're my boss, you're somebody in Starbucks, I don't stay in places where I get yelled at. So we take that same framework and we say, I unfortunately, like, I don't associate with people who don't refer to me by my pronouns. If you continue to misuse my pronouns, I unfortunately won't be able to come over, or you won't be welcome in my house, right? That's what I can control. I can't control, unfortunately, whether someone misgenders me. And that's painful, right? Is that we've had this long-standing relationship with someone who is supposed to love us as we are, right? And see us. And then there's this trigger point that now that violates this held belief that this person that I thought knew me and I thought loved me maybe doesn't. And that's true and not true, right? It's true because it's so painful, but it's really about them and their misunderstanding and their biases. And unfortunately, we can't be in control of that. And I think that is a universal experience of that anxiety, anger, resentment of the things that we can't control in other people and the things that we aren't getting from them. And so then there's room and space there for what does that look like? What do family Christmases or holidays look like, or vacations look like if we have had to hold a boundary with someone that they are not welcome, or we are not able to include them because they are not respecting who we are. And those are tough conversations to have. And again, walk with your child in an age appropriate way. In those conversations is my best advice to you.
Okay. And I think this next question also, we can kind of apply some of the same answers, but I'm still going to read it because we might think of additional things. Also, my queer teens have been struggling with bullying in school due to their gender identity expression. Any tips and or support I can verbally offer them?
Mm, I would say well, did you want to take it, Nicole?
Please keep first and I'll add on. Yeah.
I would just kind of reiterate what was already said, follow their lead. They may not want to talk about it at all. I think it was the TV series Heartstopper. I think is what it was. There was one of the main characters was just exploring their sexuality, and they were gay, and the boy, and it was like a high school, I think. The boy that he liked was also gay, hadn't been gay for a little while, and that child was bullied in school, and he went to one of the teacher's classrooms during lunchtime. He ate in the classroom at lunchtime, and the teacher sat and did his work the whole time while the child ate his lunch. So maybe that's all that's needed. Just let them come sit next to you. It's really hard. It's really easy to want to say everything's going to be okay. As an optimist, I believe that everything's going to be okay, but that's not always the best thing to promise. But, ask them what they need. Do you need to just come sit here and hang out with me? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to talk about something else altogether? Ask them, hey, how can I support you in this? I'm really sorry that this is, you're going through this and that this is happening to you, but see what that person needs from you.
Mhm. There's a couple of questions I'd want to know more that I'm obviously like not going to ask and I don't want responses to, but from a school administrative standpoint, when schools are addressing bullying, sometimes they want to know, and then their response is limited depending on when and where the bullying occurred. So if the bullying is happening on campus, in person, or digitally, then that is something, again, with your team's consent and participation, you would want to address with administrators, right? Because we do have no tolerance policies for things like that. No tolerance meaning that we don't let it slide, that is there restorative justice things we need to do? Is there misunderstandings? Are we using your child's queerness as the thing that we are bullying them about, but we're actually bullying them about something else, but we're using that as a weapon, right? Is there something under the thing, right? There's some anger, there's some resentment, there's something going on between those two things, but the weapon we're wielding is a known maybe point that they can push on that they know will elicit a negative response from your teen. So the when and where is going to change how you're going to respond, right? The other piece of it too is sometimes practicing responses, right? So practicing in a safe time when stakes are low, like, well, what are some of the things that they're saying to you if you feel like you want to share it with me? And maybe it sounds like they are, right? So even now in my adult life, when I hear adults in my life or colleague, whatever people I interact with say things that are offensive in any realm, I go, what do you mean by that? Right? That's really hard for a teen to do. You're really like standing up in that way, and that might not be something that they're capable of doing. Me as an old lady who has practice being confrontational, I can do that, right? Or even like, what a wild thing to say to somebody, right? Like, how do we build armor around our heart that not everybody has the right to know us, has the privilege of being in our circle, right? Again, as I am an optimist, is with a toe in realism, right? Like, how do I curate a world? How do I curate my friendships with people who belong to be there, right? So I'm grateful that that person showed you immediately that you are not someone that you don't want to associate with them, right?
Mhm.
So part of this, again, ties back into how do we help teens navigate friendships, right? In general, with the added layer on and they're being targeted based on their identification, right? So that would be step one, is like, when and where is it happening? Do we need to get school administrative involved? Are there threats involved? Is it unkind? Is it just being, not just, they're being unkind and they're targeting your kid in school. If it's happening outside of school hours, even if it's digitally through text or Instagram or whatever social media things that I'm too old to know about, the school is going to be limited on how much they're going to be able to support you. And there's, again, evolving case law and what that looks like. So if you're able to connect with that parent and have a discussion, block numbers if you need to, remove or find alternative ways for your child to participate in things. If that bully is in extracurricular activities, talk about it with the coach. And that way, again, you are being their advocate, but you're also problem solving with them. How would you? What would, if you could say anything to this person, what would you say? But let's maybe workshop that in a way that's going to be effective for you, so that we can decrease the distress that you're experiencing, because kids should be able to show up to school and be safe and accepted as they are. The reality is sometimes, and in this case, very different.
Okay, and kind of dovetailing with friendships and helping them navigate that. The next question says, our child who is 16 said a couple years ago that they were questioning their sexuality, but haven't said one word about it since. We have been clear about supporting and accepting their openly LGBTQ plus friends. Is it okay for us to bring it up with them, or should we just wait for them to come to us?
That's a really difficult question to ask.
Yeah, that's good.
I would say, like, honestly, I think that depending on your relationship with your child, I mean, I would assume that you have a pretty good relationship with your child if they were comfortable sharing that with you in the first place. Maybe you could approach the subject. Maybe you could introduce media that might invite conversations like that. Like the show Heartstopper is a great show to watch with a teenager or with somebody who's a young adult, because it doesn't get too heavy into adult themes, but it kind of approaches uh, sexuality and gender identity in a pretty safe way. So maybe it's like, hey, I've heard about this great show. Would you like to watch it with me?
Mhm.
And that might spark questions. It might spark conversation. If that's not your preferred method of consuming media, maybe it could be reading a book, or asking about a book, or asking about maybe a blog post, or a TikTok creator that you could share videos with each other that might spark conversation. I think a lot of times you do have to follow their lead, but I think that you can also say things like, hey, I have something that's not, like, no judgment and no pressure to answer this, but a couple of years ago, you said this. Has that evolved? How has that played out in your life?
Mhm.
Are you comfortable discussing that?
Or like, you said this, do I need to change my language around you or about you? And of course, I would not say this at Thanksgiving with grandparents.
Yeah.
It might just be a one-on-one. I have found that probably most of our deeper conversations have taken place in the car. So
Mhm.
I was driving, my kids were riding, I was picking them up from school, and, I would ask them something. One of them, it was usually, when it was just, me and one of our children, a lot of those conversations happened, in the car. I know a lot of teenagers, Gen Alpha, Gen Z, that have come out to their parents via text. So it might be something that you might want to text your kid about. Hey, you mentioned this, just checking in to see if anything's changed and if we need to, update our thinking or our language, and make it kind of like a not so heavy, listen, I need to talk to you about the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll take a moment to interject here that the phrase "I love you no matter what" is something I'm not a big fan of. I think "I love you" is a complete sentence,
Yeah.
and I think that it should just be, "Hey, I love you." And then as long as they know that and they understand that, then I think that you can open up avenues and you can create the pathways that might navigate them to that type of conversation.
Mhm.
I identify with this question a lot, because I would likely say that this is my 9-year-old's biggest complaint is I want to know. Is what makes me a fantastic psychologist, I think, is that I'm nosy in all the right ways. But and I have to check myself in that way, because my my willingness and wanting to be connected and to walk side by side with him can come off as invasive, as me being wanting to know more than what he's ready to give me. And all I'm doing is making him not want to tell me more to the point where something happened at school the other day and he wrote in his agenda, you're going to hear about this and I don't want to talk about it because he knows I always want to talk about it. So that I just identified with that question because it would be the burning question that I would want to know. And unfortunately, not by any intent that we have can come off as invasive. So I loved that suggestion of the car conversations or the walks, right? Like so many times I have conversations with my children or my partner, right? My husband, of things I didn't even know were happening and are not related to anything, but they just come out when we're not staring deeply into each other's eyes and intently sitting across the table with a spotlight on them, asking them all the questions, right? So I feel like we're giving you so many non-answers only because every situation is going to be so unique. The thing that I will just keep going back to is that trust that you know what is going to work for your child, right? We're always, as parents, questioning, as we should, right? All good parents question what we're doing and if we're doing it right. But I think also have some confidence in your history as their parent, the times that you have gotten it right, and that you're likely going to get it right here. And if you're not, you're going to repair it, right? So I would just say I trust you in that moment to know how to walk that line.
Okay, another question is, I've heard that trans people are often on the autism spectrum or that there's higher rates of presenting as trans in the autism community. Is this true? And if so, do we know why yet?
We are out of our depth, so this is Nicole. This is all you.
I can say that's been my experience. Take it away, Nicole.
I loved this question because actually when this started in my mind, at least being even research, was way back in 2010 when I was still in undergraduate school, where there really hadn't even been any research conducted on, for a long time people thought, oh, people with autism aren't interested in having sex or having a partner or relationships at all, right? Which is again a bias that we were carrying. Well, autistic people don't even want to have friends. Like, what do you mean? Let alone a partner. So I was actually part of that journey at UMass Boston was working with someone who that was their whole focus. So your question led me to PubMed, being like, well, what is the most recent research on this? And it looks like Cambridge has done a fairly recent study on it. So in 2021, it looks like that they did an anonymous survey with 1,800 yeah, that number was right. Sorry, I'm dyslexic. 16 to 90-year-olds who identify or have been diagnosed as autistic of their not only sexual orientation, but whether or not they are sexual at all. And they did find that our anecdotal experience has also been validated in the data. So here they were saying that autistic males are 3 times more likely to identify as bisexual than non-autistic males, and autistic females were 3 times as more likely to identify as homosexual rather than their non-autistic female counterparts. So there is an increased likelihood of them identifying as asexual, bisexual, or other. And the burning question is why? And it's twofold, really, right? When we have a neuro difference, it means we were born that way, right? Our brains were wired differently. And part of that different wiring is part of how we perceive the world, our sensory relay station, right? So if you think about someone who is identifies as either autistic or a person with autism, they are feeling and sensing the world even more or less than other people. And so then you can apply that logic to, well, maybe I am connected to people in a way that is different, right? So we would expect increased differences in how their sexual identity or preferences would then be expressed. So if you look at it from a neurological perspective, that's why we have comorbid neurodifferences. Once you have one neurodifference, you have an increased likelihood of having another because the wiring is located in the same part of the brain. That being said, I think there was a question there was a second part to that question, is the why. So is it that they were born that way, that's part of their neurology, or is it part of what we know or we have defined as being on the autistic spectrum, is that there maybe they are more likely to buck societal trends, right? They're like, that rule is dumb, it's illogical, and I'm not going to adhere to it because someone says it so, or because it's expected of me. So is it part of neurology? Is it part how they view the world and their experiences and their perspective? So I think, as in all things in psychology, it is both of those things interacting with each other. So I hope I answered both parts of that question, as we don't know for sure, but we do know that there is an increased likelihood that people on the spectrum may identify as LGBTQA+.
I will give like a little bit of anecdotal storytelling about that as well. When we go to different Pride events, we go as part of Free Mom Hugs. And one of the things that we do is we love to like paint dinosaurs. So we'll put like pride flags on dinosaurs and spray them with glitter spray. And people love that little thing. It's like a little trinket. It's easy. But I cannot tell you how many times people have walked up and said, "Do you have," and they give a very scientific name of a dinosaur. And I'm like, I have no idea, but I'm sure you do. So look at all the dinosaurs that I have and you tell me, yeah, you tell me which one it is. So there's like a Venn diagram that's maybe closer to a circle of people that know dinosaurs and are also interested in dinosaurs that are painted with rainbow colors.
Amazing. All right. And we had another question that I'm confessing that I'm not certain I understand. So I'll read it, and I did try to answer it in the Q&A, and if our attendee is still with us, maybe you can drop it into the Q&A again with more clarification, or put it in the chat and I'll see it, whatever is easiest for you. Because we do want to help you answer this question, but I'm not certain what it is. The question is how to understand an ADA child by parents. How can we build their IQ levels to, it says improvise, but I'm wondering if it's improve their career by controlling our emotions as a parent. So I don't know if I'm not certain what ADA is in this moment. And so if you're able to, if you're still on, if you're able to provide clarification, unless our panelists are connecting in some way that I'm.
No, not.
Okay.
I have a guess, but my guess might be wrong. ADA usually is referring to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I'm wondering if they're referencing what we were sort of just speaking to, if they have a child who has a neurodifference, or even maybe a physical difference or disability, who also identifies as being LGBTQIA+, or all three of those things. I'm not sure about the IQ level piece of it. I'm wondering if you're like talking about social IQ. Again, I could go on a whole tangent about IQ and IQ scores and what they mean and what they don't mean. So IQ tests and scores are not projective, meaning an IQ score or test doesn't tell you how well or not well someone's going to do in the future. So increasing someone's what we think of a traditional sense IQ, as in measured by an IQ test or whatever you want to define that as, there's no way to improve those sorts of things because they're made up of many different tests and tasks, and are not representative of what a child is capable or not capable of doing. I'm interested in maybe the second or third part of that question is like, what can we do as parents about controlling? And not controlling, that's not the right word, because we're not automatons, we're not robots, right? We are impacted by internal and external factors, and we need to be kind to ourselves that we are allowed to feel emotions, but how we express those emotions need to be in ways that are safe and appropriate for our children. I am allowed to be mad, right? I'm a human. My children are funny, amazing, and sometimes frustrating, right? Right now, they're pawing at the doors, slipping me notes because it is part of our bedtime routine, and they are very frustrated with me that I'm not there, and I'm maybe a little frustrated with them, right? Does that mean that I yell, throw, scream, or do those things? I'm allowed to be irritated. I'm not really right now. I think it's adorable. I got a note, but I'm pretending. How do we make sure that identifying our triggers as parents? And again, we can overlay our experience parenting in this situation as well. Our kids do lots of things that trigger us for reasons we know and for reasons we don't know. And that's our work. That's not our kids' work, right?
Mhm.
So why is it that I'm triggered that their shoes are in the middle of the foyer instead of where they should be, even though I've asked them a bunch of times, or why are their grades, right? Those are triggering for maybe for me, and we can have conversations about that and the way that we approach it. So I love the part of the question of like, how do I do all the things that you're asking me to do, which is be emotionally safe for my child? And some of that might look like us going to therapy, right? Doing some of that work behind the scenes, because we can't show up for our children if we're not understanding the behavioral patterns and loops that we are unconsciously in, right? Again, a very complicated non-answer to a really interesting question. I apologize.
Yeah.
Well, and we have some resources on the slide. Amber and Ken are part of PFLAG Detroit, so that's definitely a really solid community to connect with. And then there's the national PFLAG website where there's a lot of resources and different things that you can use in this journey. The Ruth Ellis Center in Detroit, Affirmations in Ferndale, Transgender Michigan, and Stand with Trans, which is in our community in Farmington. So all kind of local and regional and national resources for you and your family. And then I did list some books that are at the Farmington Community Library. You can check these books out for free with your library card. And if you aren't a Farmington Community Library card holder, but you have a different home library, you can bring that card and use it here because all libraries work together to support each other. And one book that I don't have on here, but I will add to the slides is My Child is Trans, Now What? And that is by Ben Green, and we do have that as well at the library.
Good.
I bought that book for our collection, so I'm like, that sounds
Yay.
familiar. So I will make sure that gets onto the slides, and I have on this screen my email. If you would like these slides emailed to you, you can always email me, and then any library questions, accessing resources that the library has. And then Ken and Amber Long, thank you again for your presence here and your sharing so courageously
having
your
us.
lived experience. And they will be a wealth of resources, and they're very open to having any conversations that you have, and you're coming with curiosity and authenticity to that conversation. They said they will be happy to talk with you. So if you want to reach out to them, their emails are here. And Nicole Slade, thank you for bringing all that like neuro nerd content to us and helping us like figure out how to navigate these situations. And Nicole's email is there as well for those resources too. So thank you all for being here, for holding space, and for being champions of your kids
Yeah.
and showing up.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you
same.
for
Thanks
having
for
us.
having us.
We will have the recording on YouTube in the next couple of days. Everyone take care.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.